Welcome everybody to the periodic table of history. This is where we study history in 4 dimensions. And one of the questions I've always wondered at is, where did the 12 apostles come from? So we can look at our time axis and know that the time of Jesus is about right here relative to the biblical time scale. That's starting with Adam, going down to the flood, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Then we have the patriarchs, the kings of Israel, King David at about 1000 BC, Solomon a little bit closer to us, and then down here to the time of Jesus. The apostles could have been similar to the age of Jesus, a little older, a little younger, but within this time era. We can go to our map also, and I'll turn on all the apostles, including Matthias and Paul, and we see that they are all covered right here in the Middle East. So Paul, however, is an exception, so we can zoom in here just a little bit more into Israel, and we can see just about where everyone comes from, and that is approximate. Some of these are well known, and a couple of them are not known very well. But let's decompile these and then recompile them. It's instructive to see that the birthplace of Jesus is right here in Bethlehem. That was something that a lot of the Jews had a really hard time with. They said the Messiah would come from Bethlehem, so they wouldn't believe that Jesus was the Messiah. Herod was having the smaller children killed, and so Jesus had to flee from Bethlehem. So he went to Egypt temporarily, and then Jesus went up to Nazareth. That's why Jesus is called a Nazarene. Because if we zoom in here, we can see that this is Nazareth. Notice its location as relative to the Sea of Galilee. We can see how close that is. It's about 15 miles away. If Jesus wanted to go to the beach, here 20 miles, or let's see right in here, 17 miles, 18 miles. Okay, so that's what we're looking at as far as the distance, and really when you think about that, that's not really a great distance. When you see how small Israel actually is. Now, Matthew 10 talks about Jesus selecting the 12 apostles. You can look in Matthew 10, 2-4. The names are also displayed in Mark chapter 3, 13 through 19, Luke chapter 6, 13 through 16. Now, the newer apostles, that's Matthias and Paul, they come up in Acts 1 and Acts 9. All in all, we end up with this list of the 12 apostles, and then Matthias, who replaced Judas after the crucifixion and the suicide of Judas, and then Paul, who was specially selected to go to the Gentiles. So let's take these one at a time. Peter, home of Peter, says he's the son of John. Now, a couple sets of these disciples are brothers, because Peter and Andrew are brothers, James and John are brothers, and then we have a curiosity that I guess theologians can talk about for centuries and millennial to come, and it is, the scripture says, Matthew, son of Alphaeus, and James, son of Alphaeus. We don't know if they're brothers because the scripture tells us explicitly of Peter, Andrew, and James and John, but doesn't explicitly state Matthew and James are brother. It just says they're both son of Alphaeus. So maybe they are, maybe they are not. When I got into this study, it's amazing how much conjecture there is, assumptions you have to make, inter-family member linkages, that if your doctrine is built one way, then you say certain things, or if your doctrine is built another way, then you say other things. Each one of the doctrinal differences excluding other facts. So as somebody that likes things to be absolute, it's a little bit difficult of a study for absolutists, but as far as getting at least an overall picture, we can start connecting some of these up. So there's Peter and Andrew. Another one of the disciples is James, son of Zebedee, and then also John, son of Zebedee. So you can see how far Jesus is away from them as well. Philip is one of the fishermen that lived along the Sea of Galilee. Now, Bartholomew was from Cana. It's well known where Cana is, so it's well known that Bartholomew lived very close to this region. Thomas isn't one that's very well known, but he was from Galilee, and Galilee is this northern part of what we think of as Israel today. If Matthew and James are brothers, then this Alphaeus would be right here around the Sea of Galilee, and this would be the picture. James, son of Alphaeus, lived by the Sea of Galilee, so he's also very well acquainted with these other brothers, or the same area that Peter, Andrew, James, and John were acquainted with. Thaddeus is not one of the well-known disciples. Simon the Zealot, and also Simon the Canaanite, we know where he is from. He's also more of an outsider, more of a border town kind of a person. Now, Judas is the one with the big city, very educated. It was Matthew and Judas that were probably the most educated of the disciples. Now, Judas ends up committing suicide, so Matthias is the replacement, and he was from Judah. So that's the southern kingdom of what we think of as Israel. When we get all of them together, this is the picture that we can come up with. So there are, in fact, 4 different centers where the disciples of Jesus came from. The biggest one is right here around the Sea of Galilee. Then up here in Cana and Galilee, just a few of the disciples came from this area. Then a couple down south, and then one up here in Tarsus, which is not even Israel at all. It's fun to look at where the disciples came from and then imagine where they went and the different missions that God had each one of them on. And just for fun, I'm going to come in here. Just think of Jesus being a child. And then kind of get an airplane view of this region. As Jesus could look over to the Mediterranean to the east, he could look out across the fields where they were producing all that food, the granaries. He could look to the mountains along the north, and he could even look out here to the Sea of Galilee. This is what Jesus would have seen as he was growing up. And these are the views and experiences he would have access to. When you link those up and start thinking about disciples then, we can see that Jesus probably spent a lot of time along these roads. He would have been able to travel down here. He would be able to go down along these mountain roads, hit the main valley roads. It looks like there's a couple of them. He would have gone to the Sea of Galilee on the west side, taking this road. Or he could have gone on this other road and ended up at the more north part. So that would have been the huge area, 7 of the disciples right there from that area. And then we have this mountainous area going back over to the Mediterranean Sea. We have Thaddeus, Thomas, Simon, Bartholomew. So in my way of thinking, I love doing this because it gives me perspective of the Bible scriptures I've read about all my life. Studying in this way just gives me that tangibility of how Jesus may have perceived part of the world around him as someone who actually lived on this planet. He could have walked from where he was out here to John and Andrew or Matthew's house. Probably would have taken him a day because that's 20 miles. He would have gone over these mountains and things, but it's very easy to do. He could have gone from there over to Thaddeus and Thomas, crossing these mountains. Maybe he would have hiked all these mountains. Maybe he had times where he went out here and spent time fishing on the Mediterranean Sea or came back here to the Sea of Galilee. But when you see how small this is, and then when you zoom back out, it gives me a sense of awe that this was the birthplace of Christianity that transformed the world. What we're looking at here is the origin place of a religion that said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. That went all over the world and changed the world for the better. Well, I hope that helps you in your studies and gives you a visual of where the disciples came from. These people that we read about in the Bible were the ones that transformed the world for the better. And it all started right here. Well, I thank you for watching. I hope you have a great week. I would ask that if you are from Israel and you know the exact locations of where these disciples are celebrated as having been born, that you just write those into the comment section. I think that would help everybody. It would help anybody that's going to Israel, and they'd get a better understanding of the tangibility of the 12 disciples of Jesus. I thank you in advance, and I hope the best for you. See you in the next video.